Whether it's digestive pains, joint pain, headaches, whatever it might be, one thing that I frequently hear from the vast majority of those who suffer with a chronic ailment is that their symptoms tend to flare up a lot more often during the holidays. At first glance, this doesn't appear to make any sense. However, I actually think that there are a lot of circumstances that are unique to the holidays that have the potential of negatively impacting a compromised body far more than any other time of the year. The first thing that I want to bring up is one very common trait that I've observed in the vast majority of those suffering with a chronic condition. And what that is that these people tend to crave and cherish routine, and they absolutely hate any unexpected event that suddenly crops up that disrupts this delicate routine. I think we'd all agree that a chronically ill body is generally a very fragile body that has a very low resilience to the stresses of everyday life. But I think a far more useful way of seeing this is to see a chronically ill body as one that struggles to adapt to changes in its external environment. One thing that I frequently discuss on my channel, and it links into this idea of not being able to handle the holidays, is the human body's inability to correctly interpret external sensory information at an unconscious level once lesions or dysfunctions have arisen in areas of the brain or sensory nervous system. This can be extremely menial things that you've probably never considered before, like interpreting gravity, various body positions, or adjusting to certain visual stimuli, all factors that are present in our lives practically 24/7. If the body unconsciously struggles to decode these variables, then what ends up happening is the brain is continuously fed inaccurate sensory signaling from its external environment. And what this then goes on to cause is the brain to struggle to know how to run the rest of the body. Now, if the brain were to receive continuously accurate sensory signaling from receptors in our sensory nervous system, it will sufficiently charge the cortex, which are these two hemispheres at the very top of our brain, and they will then in turn fire neuronal signals down into the area of the brain just beneath it, called the basal ganglia. With these signals, the basal ganglia then produces inhibitory neurotransmitters, which basically suppress areas of the brain beneath it in the brainstem, which goes on to quieten down autonomic activity throughout the entire body. If, however, the opposite were to occur and a compromised sensory nervous system continuously fed the cortex with mismatched sensory signals, that would then in turn cause the cortex to not sufficiently fire down into the basal ganglia, which in turn won't go on to produce adequate amounts of inhibitory neurotransmitters to help to keep the brainstem in check. And as a result, hyperactivity in this part will then go on to lead to heightened autonomic nervous system activity throughout the entire body. Notably, one of these affected systems that can go on to cause plenty of widespread issues is the central respiratory generator, which is an unconscious and automatic breathing rhythm set in our brainstem. When this system is thrown out of sync, it can go on to disrupt our breathing patterns, heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, hormonal release, immune system markers, circulation, fluid balance, our cognitive state, and those are only a handful of physiological repercussions that can end up arising. Another variable that a faster unconscious respiratory rate is generally associated with is a low HRV, or heart rate variability, which is the length of time that passes in between each individual heartbeat. This is super relevant to what I spoke about at the start of the video, as having a higher HRV typically indicates a much better tolerance to stressors of everyday life and more flexibility in the face of unexpected events or routine disruptors, whereas a low HRV indicates a body that struggles to adapt to daily stressors, and as a result, the individual of that body will attempt to make their day-to-day life as simple as possible with very little spontaneity. And the reason why I bring all of this up is because the holidays tends to be the time of year that really challenges the whole integrity of this system. But just before I explain why, if you haven't already done so, make sure to check out the Unbeatable Blueprint online course. Here I teach you all about these neural networks and what happens to you when their ability to function is compromised. I also provide you with the exact step-by-step plan that you need to follow in order to repair these dysfunctions. If we really think about it, there are tons of factors that are typically unique to the holidays that both have the potential for testing our low heart rate variability and also further increasing our unconscious respiratory rate. So we've got more social interactions with family members or friends, more invites out, which creates more routine disruptors, eating or drinking at different times during the day compared to what you're used to, journeys travelling to unfamiliar environments, spending more time away from home, and just not being sure when you'll return to your safe space. Certain factors will also challenge the function of our inbuilt sensory receptors existing within our nervous system. So this could be things like continually changing body position, travelling more frequently in a vehicle, having lots of people in our vicinity, socialising and talking more often, and just having far more external stimuli to have to process in our environment, like crowded venues, more noise, or brighter lights. This all tests the integrity of our brain and sensory nervous system and how well equipped it actually is to be able to handle these sensory cues that it's being continuously confronted with. Also, for those people with heavily compromised nervous systems, simply the thought of having to engage in these events will likely play heavily on their mind. And hands up in the comment section if this is you, because I know this was me for the longest period of time. Most of us just try so hard to avoid the unpredictability of these activities. And of course it goes without saying that those of us who find ourselves in this stressed and anxious frame of mind, this can further contribute to disrupting our unconscious respiratory rate, increasing our breathing patterns, and thus throwing our body further out of balance. So just to summarise, I believe that one of the key culprits behind the emergence and persistence of many long-standing chronic conditions and symptoms is certain dysfunctions existing either within our brain or sensory nervous system. When these dysfunctions are present, our body has a hard time unconsciously being able to decode its external environment, and as a result, our body ends up having a very narrow bandwidth of resilience to the stressors of everyday life, and it prompts us into living a very routine day-to-day life. Whereas the holiday season creates, if anything, the polar opposite of this situation, where unexpected visitors, random trips out, unexpected events, spontaneous journeys to new environments, or eating and drinking at different times all throw a compromised body further out of its homeostatic state. I guess the simple way of saying it is that the current body that we've ended up with, frankly, just finds all of these scenarios just way too overwhelming, and flare-ups of chronic symptoms regularly arise because the brain suddenly struggles to effectively regulate processes within the body. So what I believe to be the best way to overcome this problem isn't necessarily to limit your exposure to these events that occur during the holidays, but to instead strengthen the weak signaling of certain neural structures or pathways that are currently existing within you. And that's so that their function allows you to much better withstand the stress that these events bring with them. The goal should be to strengthen your machine to make it more resilient to its environment, not to alter your environment to try to make it more accommodating to your dysfunction. And personally, I was only able to improve my own tolerance to these situations once I had the function of my brain and sensory nervous system thoroughly assessed, and that was done by a board-certified chiropractic neurologist. As soon as specific dysfunctions were identified, I was then given very targeted neurological exercises that I had to consistently perform, but they massively improved my ability to be able to handle all of these events that regularly occur throughout the holidays.